Hello everybody and welcome to our lesson where we are going to have a look at our macro environment, specifically the challenges posed by the specific components of the macro environment. Now, before we start, did you know that load shedding is currently costing billions of rands daily for businesses in South Africa? Now, foreign press have estimated that our economy could have been 17% larger if it wasn't for load shedding. So this is an example of a challenge that businesses face in today's day and age that can be found in the macro environment. So let's then look at our lesson objectives for this lesson. So we will be looking at, of course, the components of the macro environment, specifically some practical examples of these components and the reason these components will pose challenges to the business. So we will specifically focus on the different kinds of challenges each of these components will pose our businesses. So of course then when we have explained them, you should also be able to identify these components from a given scenario, cartoon or picture. So this is our concept map for today's lesson. Of course, we will be focusing on the challenges of each of these components, and the components, of course, being political, economical, social, technological, legal, and environmental. Now, let's take a look at some pre-knowledge and concepts you should be familiar with. Our first pre-knowledge concept is then macro environment, which is then, of course, our broader external environment, which then has an influence on our business. Now, the first term is actually a component of the macro environment and is then our political environment. Now, political environment refers to the government and its institutions, and this includes all actions and decisions made by government which can have an influence on your business. The next term then you should be familiar with is economical environment, which is then all economic factors, and these factors can then influence our buying habits, and this is then the buying habits of the consumers or the businesses. Social environment, of course, refers to people. So when we refer to social environment, we refer to the setting in which people live, as well as the society in which the business operates. Then you should also be familiar with the term technological environment, which is then all developments in the field of technology. So think about software updates or upgrades, new machinery and inventions being developed and invented. Then legal environments, legal of course referring to laws or even rules that have been implemented by government and its institutions. And then the last term you should be familiar with is environmental environment. And of course, the environmental environment includes our natural and our international environments, which then of course influence the business. So let's take a look at a few pre-knowledge practice questions. The first, of course, define the term or define the macro environment. So of course then the macro environment is our broader external environment, which then has an influence with the business, not to be confused with the micro or the market environment. Our second question or pre-knowledge question, identify the macro environment component described by each of the following statements. So the components, of course, being political, economic, social, technological, legal, or environmental. So the first statement, A, passed and amended laws that impact the business. Now, of course, laws refer to our legal environment. All right, so that is then our first component, the legal environment. Then statement B, factors like inflation, that is our first clue, and interest rates that have an influence on the business Inflation and interest rates are, of course, examples of economic factors or economic environmental factors. So our answer here will be economic environment. And then statement C, the government and its institutions that influence the business. So remember, government and its institutions are all a part of our political environment. So our component here then, of course, will be political environment. Statement D, the setting in which people live. So remember, when we refer to people, it's social. And the society or the community in which the people operate, or the business rather operate, is then, of course, our social environment. So this is then our component for statement D. So that is our pre-knowledge practice questions. Then our new words for today. The first word is then challenge, because we will of course be focusing on the challenges posed by the components. So a challenge is any possible occurrence that might have a negative impact on your business. So a challenge is of course then negative. So the second word then here is then inflation rate. You should have heard of inflation rate by now, but inflation rate refers to the general increase in prices. So it means that everything is getting more expensive because of inflation rate. So that means that all the purchasing value of money will decrease because prices are increasing. Our third new word then is our interest rate. Interest rate is when you pay money back that you have loaned, and then you normally pay interest on that money. So it's any extra money that you have to pay back when you borrow money, or if you are lucky enough, if you have invested money, you will receive interest on the money you have invested. Then our last new word is then exchange rate. So this is the value of one currency compared to the value of another. For example, the value of the rand will be maybe 18 Rand 50, and that is our dollar rand exchange rate. So that is the value of one currency for then conversion to another. And that is our new words. Before we continue and look at the challenges of the components, let's go take a short break.